Hey everybody. I just wanted to pop on really quick and talk about something that is a question that keeps being asked of me. Last night I posted a reel about a problematic university that I have former affiliations with. And often the question that gets asked of me is, how does this keep happening, right? People are like, how do they keep getting away with it? How do they get, why isn't anybody doing anything? And so I'm not going to touch on that university too much today, but I'm going to tell you about why I think these things keep happening and why people keep getting away with it. So in 2007, I enrolled at, this is kind of like a story time, so just hang with me. It's important. I enrolled at Argosy University in Denver, Colorado. I was the first student who actually entered into their doctorate program in, what was it? Counseling psychology. I don't even remember what the program was at this point, but the long and short of it was that I enrolled with this program because I had a small child and who had special medical needs, and I needed to have an evening and weekend program that would work with my needs as a parent. So I think it was like 3 years later, I had completed all of my coursework. I was just about to start my dissertation research, and the school had a meeting. They called us in and told us that they had discovered that we needed to take an additional, I think it was like 6 courses in order to meet licensing requirements in Colorado, because according to them, the licensing requirements had changed. Well, it hadn't. They were lying. The licensing requirements had not changed. What happened was that they built the program for the Denver campus and just copied and pasted the program from the Chicago campus and didn't bother to check to see whether or not the licensing requirements for licensed psychologists were the same in Colorado as they were in Illinois, which obviously they were not. And so they were trying to cover their asses and make it out as though it was because Colorado licensing had changed, as opposed to them not doing their due diligence and doing a good job. So at that point, of course, students were pissed and they were trying to make it out like they were letting us take these classes for free. But 6 classes in a graduate program is an additional year. Like, that's a lot to add on to someone, especially those of us that were already working on our dissertations and were getting, what we thought was ready to graduate. And then we just now have another year. So what ended up happening was that I was like, this is not right. There's something wrong here. I knew intuitively that they were not being honest. And so I started doing some research and looking into things. And that's how I found out that they were lying. I found out that they were not telling the truth about the licensing change. They were just trying to cover their asses. So at that point, I I did everything that I could do to solve the problem within the university and kind of to hold them accountable. Like, you're not being honest. This isn't what happened. At that point, there was 3 of us that were the loudest in pushing back. And at that point, they what they did was they accused myself and another student of being having conduct issues, those of us that were the most vocal, and called us into meetings and basically tried to get us to agree to not speak out any further and to write a letter and admit that we had been doing things that we had never done. Sorry, it's a little bit dry in here. In my meeting, my friend and just a overall wonderful person, Gary Barnes, went with me. And Gary was asking a lot of questions around what specific behavior was the problem. They couldn't find anything. Long and short of it, I ended up quitting the program because I wasn't going to admit to something that I hadn't done. So I left the program. Mind you, I had already completed everything other than, I was 1 year out from graduating. And this was in 2010, okay? I left that program. and enrolled into a different program where I basically had to start all over again. So it was a lot. It was a huge thing. And so at that point, I wanted to have a resolution. I was like, this is wrong. They shouldn't be able to get away with this. I contacted the Federal Department of Education and had a meeting with an investigator. I contacted Colorado Department of Higher Education, gave them everything. I contacted lawyers. I literally reached out to everybody that I could contact, including media, everybody that I could possibly get to listen to me, and nobody cared. Nobody paid attention. What ended up finally happening was that in around 2011, because I'm stubborn as hell and I wasn't going to let this go, or 2011 or 2012, I reached out to the Colorado Attorney General's office, had a meeting, and sat down, and I literally handed the Attorney General's office a binder that was all of the email, all of the paperwork, literally an entire case. I'm not a lawyer, but I probably should have been one. And it was color-coded, everything was tabbed, their entire case was in that folder. I handed it to them, and a year, 18 months later, they had a settlement agreement with Argosy, who admitted that they had committed wrongdoing, et cetera, et cetera. That was the only way that any accountability came. So they got a settlement, but you know who wasn't included in the settlement? The three of us that were the loudest whistleblowers. So everybody else in the school got their student loans refunded. Argosy had to pay them all back. So all of those people that stayed and didn't speak out and didn't say anything got a free doctorate education. The rest of us got stuck with that education, the loans from that experience, and the ones from the program that we transferred to. So we ended up with 2 times the amount of debt that the other students had because we weren't currently enrolled in the program when they had the settlement, even though we had been forced out, even though they pushed us out. So at the end of the day, every other student got their money paid back. We did not. We still are fighting. At least 2 of us are still fighting to get that resolved. The Attorney General of Colorado took a significant portion of the settlement, and instead of paying off our loans because we weren't students at the time, they just kind of washed their hands of it and walked away. I've been, again, still trying. This has been over 10 years now. I'm still trying to get some justice for that. But the point of this video is that nobody listened. That eventually Argosy, I think it was in 2018, the entire program got shut down because of exactly this type of behavior. They were defrauding students. They were enrolling students and making promises that they couldn't keep. They were essentially a diploma mill and were taking students' money, taking a shit ton of money from the federal government, and not able to deliver on the promises that they were making. And so finally, the federal government said enough is enough and shut them down. And now there's a settlement that's going through for students that were defrauded. It's been approved, and it should be over the course of the next couple of years. People will get their loans refunded for their time at Argosy. But my point in this, when people ask the question, how do they keep getting away with it? It's because, one thing, the systems don't care. Like, literally, the systems didn't care. There was no, when I sat down with an investigator from the Federal Department of Education, and I was like, they are defrauding students. They are lying. They're defrauding students. They're essentially stealing money from the federal government, and nobody cares. Nobody's listening. And they were like, there's really nothing we can do about it because there was like some kind of like tiny little loophole. So they didn't care. The Colorado Department of Education didn't care. They weren't willing to pursue it and investigate it. The media didn't care because it was just me. It was really, I was the most vocal. I was kind of the one that was reaching out and pushing the issue. And so sorry, dog's barking. Me as one person wasn't enough to get any attention. It wasn't enough to get people to pay attention. and to actually take action. And so where we're at right now with like social media, it's a lot better because you can say something on social media and people listen, people pay attention. Sometimes things that, one voice can take things a lot further. But literally the systems are not constructed to help the consumer. Even consumer protection, even all of those things are really not constructed, and they're not meant to help the individual. They're meant to uphold power. So when we're talking about these corrupt institutions that are stealing money and defrauding and harming their consumers, part of the reason that they're getting away with it is because not enough people are coming forward. There's power in numbers. If in our situation at Argosy, if it had been more than 3 of us that came forward, if it had been 15 of us or 30 of us, they couldn't have ignored us. But because it was only 1, there was like 3 of us. I was the most vocal, and my colleague Heather was also very vocal. And so there was really only 2 of us that were calling it out and naming it really loudly and constantly, and not letting them gaslight us. And so because of that, it was easy for them to just silence us and to be like, well, it's not any big deal because these 2 are just like problem students and we'll just make them go away. So how institutions get away with it is because the organizations that are meant to hold them accountable often don't hold them accountable. So in this instance, this university that I was talking about yesterday, which is Naropa University in Boulder, I have done that. I've reached out to media. I've reached out to other organizations. I've reached out to the Department of Regulatory Agencies, the Higher Learning Commission, like literally every organization that I can think to reach out to say this institution, while they may not currently be doing the thing that caused harm, they were doing some pretty bad stuff for a while, and students and graduates have been harmed because of that. And nobody cares. Nobody's responding. And that's why this stuff keeps happening, because as much as we'd like to believe that these systems are meant to help people and are meant to help consumers, in reality, they're meant to uphold power. And so how do we get things to get movement? How do we get justice? Is by more people speaking out than just 1 or 2 people. If you're in a situation where you're being harmed and you know that other people are being harmed, it's hard to stand up and tell the truth and to do what needs to be done. But it's the right thing to do, right? It's the right thing to stand up and say, this is an issue and it needs to be addressed. And secondly, we just have to stay on it. Like, it literally took me years. It was years before that settlement happened. But when that settlement happened, it was a validation that what happened was true, and that I was right the entire time. And other people got justice. Of course I didn't. I'm still waiting. Hopefully that will come to an end soon. But I had to be stubborn. I had to make sure that I didn't give up, and holding these organizations accountable. So what's wild about this, and why I even wanted to get on and talk about it, is that if they had listened, if the federal government had listened to those of us that were raising the alarm, because there were a number of students that, not just at my campus, but there are students around the country that were raising the issues in their own campuses and their own programs. So there was a small group of people that kept saying, hey, this is a problem. Had they listened to us and investigated what we were saying, had the federal government done that, these programs would have been shut down at least, I'm trying to think, probably, what is that, like 7 years, 5 to 7 years before they were eventually cut off from federal funding, because they were misappropriating and misusing the funds. So that would have saved the federal government, I mean, I don't even know, probably millions, if not billion, over like around $1 billion. There was a ton of money that could have been saved had they just listened. And so why I'm talking about this now is twofold, because I want people to know that there is justice. There is a way to get justice, but sometimes you have to be persistent. You have to be stubborn, right? I'm like very much that. I am very stubborn, and I'm very much not willing to and just let injustice go by without continuing to speak up about it. So if you're in a situation, and I think this is happening a lot more with higher education right now, mostly because higher education has shifted into a consumer model and is most programs are very tuition dependent, and there's a lot of issues that come with that. But the number one thing that I would say is like continue to speak out and continue to fight for justice, because there is a way to get justice. There's always a way if you continue to fight for it. And the more the merrier, right? If you are a part of an institution that has caused harm or that has been harmful, gather your peers and don't give up, right? Heather and I, we continued, and our other friend continued to hold this institution accountable for quite some time. And we got there was justice that was served. We're still again waiting for ours to come down. So that's been over 10 years that happened. And for some people who were victimized by this institution, Argosy University, it'll be another couple of years before their loans are discharged and they're able to do things like buy a house and not worry about their credit score. And, because this impacts people in a multitude of ways. So I think that just wanting to encourage people to continue to hold people accountable and not to give up, right? Sometimes the fight for justice takes a long time, but it's always worth it in the end. And for everybody else that's watching, if you are a person who has some kind of systemic power and these things are brought to your attention, like listen to people, pay attention. I was right. I was right all along. The Attorney General built a case and got a $3.3 million settlement, of which I didn't see a dime, based on the information that I handed them in a binder. And then they screwed us over, right? And so if you're a person who is in a position of institutional power and you know that wrongs are happening, you have a moral obligation to fix that, to do something about it, to address it, not to cover it up, not to cover your own ass and try to protect yourself at the expense of people who are vulnerable. And so everybody, just encourage you to keep speaking out, encourage you to continue to rally together. It's community that's going to get us through all of the things that we're facing. It's community that has gotten me through, and let's just keep working, right? These institutions are meant to do good and not cause harm. And as long as they're causing harm, people like me are going to continue speaking out. So have a great day, everybody. Bye.